Imagine marrying someone who despises you, only to discover that beneath their cold exterior lies a heart full of secrets and pain. In today's story, we'll uncover the shocking journey of a powerful CEO who weds a woman out of revenge, only to find himself falling deeply in love on their wedding night. But can love truly conquer betrayal? Join us to understand the story better. The city was cloaked in darkness, the rain pouring relentlessly as if the heavens themselves were mourning. Neon lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting an eerie glow on the empty streets. High above the chaos, in a sleek glass tower, Logan St. James sat alone in his office. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of his fingers against the edge of his desk. His sharp blue eyes stared out at the storm, but his mind was far away, lost in the shadows of his past. Logan was a man of power, a name that commanded respect in the world of medical technology. To the outside world, he was a visionary, a genius who had revolutionized healthcare. But beneath the polished exterior lay a man haunted by pain, a pain that had festered for years, growing into a cold, unrelenting. He closed his eyes, and the memories came flooding back. His mother's frail figure, her tear-streaked face as she clung to him, whispering apologies she didn't owe. The image of her lying alone in a hospital bed, abandoned by the man who had once promised her the world. That man was Robert Brooks, the father of Haley Brooks, the woman Logan had sworn to destroy. Logan's jaw tightened as he leaned back in his chair. He had waited years for this moment, meticulously planning every step. Now the time had come. Haley Brooks would pay for her father's sins, and Logan would finally have his revenge. But as the storm raged on outside, a small, unspoken question lingered in the back of his mind. Would revenge truly fill the void in his heart? Logan St. James hadn't always been the cold, calculating man he was today. There was a time when his life was filled with warmth, laughter, and the unconditional love of his mother, Margaret St. James. She was his world, a woman of grace and strength, who had raised him alone after his father's untimely death. For years it was just the two of them, and though they didn't have much, they had each other. But everything changed when Robert Brooks entered their lives. Robert was a wealthy businessman, charming and persuasive. He promised Margaret stability, a future free from struggle. For a brief moment, Logan believed they could finally have the family they deserved. But those promises were nothing more than lies. Robert's betrayal came swiftly and without warning. He abandoned Margaret for another woman, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. The fallout was devastating. Margaret's health began to decline, her once bright eyes dimmed by heartbreak and exhaustion. Logan, still a teenager at the time, watched helplessly as the woman who had been his rock crumbled under the weight of Robert's betrayal. The final blow came when Margaret passed away, alone in a hospital room, her hand clutching a photograph of Logan. Logan's grief quickly turned to anger, and that anger hardened into a resolve that would shape the rest of his life. He vowed to rebuild everything they had lost, to rise above the ashes of his mother's suffering, and when he did, he would make Robert Brooks pay. Years later, Logan had kept his promise. He had built an empire in the medical technology industry, a company that saved lives and generated billions. But his success wasn't enough. The pain of his mother's death still lingered, a constant reminder of the man who had destroyed her. Then, fate handed him an opportunity. Robert Brooks was no longer the powerful man he once was. His health was failing and his fortune had dwindled. But he had a daughter, Haley Brooks. She was nothing like her father, kind, selfless, and dedicated to helping others. But to Logan, she was the perfect target. If he couldn't destroy Robert directly, he would do it through her. Logan's lips curled into a cold smile as he thought of Haley. She had no idea what was coming. The first time Logan St. James saw Haley Brooks, she was standing in the middle of a crowded community center, her hands full of donation boxes, her face flushed from the effort. She wasn't what he had expected. In his mind, the daughter of Robert Brooks would be spoiled, entitled, and oblivious to the struggles of others. But Haley was none of those things. She was ordinary. Her clothes were simple, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail, and her smile, though tired, was genuine. She moved through the room with a quiet determination, stopping to thank volunteers and offer words of encouragement. Logan watched her from a distance, his sharp eyes studying her every move. This was the woman he had spent years preparing to destroy. For a moment he hesitated, but only for a moment. Logan adjusted his tie and stepped forward, his presence commanding attention as he approached her. "Miss Brooks?" he said, his voice smooth and calculated. Haley turned, startled by the tall, impeccably dressed man standing before her. "I'm Logan St. James. I've heard about the work you're doing here, and I must say, it's impressive." Haley blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Oh, thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. "We're just trying to do what we can for the community." Logan offered a charming smile, one he'd perfected over years of boardroom negotiations. "I'd like to help," he said simply. "Whatever you need, funding, resources, connections, consider it done." Haley's eyes widened in surprise. "That's incredibly generous of you, Mr. St. James, but why would you want to help us?" Logan tilted his head, feigning thoughtfulness. "Let's just say I believe in giving back," he replied smoothly, "and I admire people who dedicate their lives to helping others." It was a lie, of course. Logan didn't care about the community center or the people it served. This was merely the first step in his plan. By presenting himself as a benefactor, he could gain Haley's trust and insert himself into her life. From there, it would only be a matter of time before he had her exactly where he wanted her. Over the next few weeks, Logan made good on his promise. He donated a substantial sum to the community center, attended events, and even volunteered his time, always ensuring that Haley noticed his efforts. Slowly but surely, he became a fixture in her world, a presence she couldn't ignore. And yet, something unexpected began to happen. The more time Logan spent around Haley, the more he found himself drawn to her. It wasn't just her kindness or her dedication to others. It was the way she carried herself, the quiet strength she exuded despite the challenges she faced. She was nothing like her father, and that realization unsettled him. Logan shook off the thought. This wasn't about her. This was about revenge, and he wouldn't let himself forget that. But as he watched Haley laugh with a group of children at the community center, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a question he wasn't ready to answer. What if she didn't deserve this? Logan St. James was a man who thrived on control. Every move he made was calculated, every word carefully chosen. And now, as he sat across from Haley Brooks in a quiet corner of a bustling cafe, he knew he was about to make his boldest move yet. Haley looked exhausted. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee. Logan had been watching her closely over the past few weeks, and he knew the weight she carried. Her father's health was deteriorating rapidly, and the medical bills were piling up. She was running out of options, and Logan was ready to offer her a lifeline, one that would bind her to him forever. "I've been thinking," Logan began, his voice calm and measured, "about your situation, about your father." Haley glanced up at him, her brow furrowed. "What about it?" Logan leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "I want to help you, Haley. I can cover your father's medical expenses, ensure he gets the best care possible. You won't have to worry about money ever again." Haley's eyes widened in shock. "Logan, that's incredibly generous, but I can't accept that. It's too much." Logan allowed a small smile to play on his lips. "I'm not offering this as a gift," he said smoothly. "I'm offering it as a deal." Haley's expression shifted to one of confusion. "A deal?" "Yes," Logan said, his tone steady. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unexpected. Haley blinked, as if she hadn't heard him correctly. "What?" she whispered. "Marry me," Logan repeated, his voice firm. "It's a simple arrangement. You become my wife, and in return I'll take care of everything, your father's treatment, your financial struggles, all of it. You'll never have to worry again." Haley stared at him, her mind racing. "But why? Why would you want to marry me?" Logan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I need a wife for personal reasons. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get the help you need, and I get what I want." Haley's heart pounded in her chest. The offer was tempting, too tempting. She thought of her father, lying in a hospital bed, his life hanging by a thread. She thought of the sleepless nights, the endless worry, the crushing weight of responsibility. This could be the answer to all her prayers. But something about Logan's proposal felt off. There was a coldness in his eyes, a detachment that made her uneasy. "I don't know," she said hesitantly. "This feels wrong." Logan's jaw tightened, but he quickly masked his frustration with a reassuring smile. "I understand your hesitation," he said, "but think about it, Haley. This isn't about love or romance. It's about survival. You need help, and I'm offering it. All I ask in return is your cooperation." Haley looked down at her hands, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and desperation. She didn't trust Logan, not completely. But what choice did she have? Her father's life was at stake, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. After a long silence, she finally looked up at Logan, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." Logan's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good," he said, his tone almost triumphant. "You won't regret this." The wedding was a whirlwind. Logan spared no expense, ensuring the ceremony was a grand spectacle that would make headlines. Haley felt like a stranger in her own life, swept up in a world of luxury and excess that she didn't belong to. The dress, the flowers, the endless stream of guests, it was all too much. And through it all, Logan remained distant, his demeanor cool and composed. On their wedding night, Haley sat alone in the lavish bedroom of Logan's penthouse, staring out at the city lights. She felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage, trapped in a marriage that wasn't real. When Logan finally entered the room, she turned to face him, her heart pounding. He didn't say a word. Instead, he walked to the window, his back to her. The silence was suffocating. "Logan," Haley said softly, her voice trembling, "why did you really marry me?" Logan didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and distant. "It doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that you're here now. That's all you need to know." Haley felt a pang of sadness in her chest. She didn't understand him, and she wasn't sure she ever would. But as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Logan St. James than he was willing to show. And Logan, lying awake on the other side of the bed, couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The days after the wedding were a blur of awkward silences and unspoken tension. Haley moved into Logan's penthouse, a sprawling space of glass and steel that felt more like a museum than a home. She tried to adjust to her new life, but the coldness of the place and of Logan made it impossible to feel at ease. He was polite, even courteous at times, but there was always a distance between them, an invisible wall she couldn't break through. Logan, on the other hand, was finding it harder than he expected to maintain that wall. He had thought this would be easy: marry Haley, keep her close, and slowly dismantle her life as part of his revenge. But the more time he spent around her, the more cracks began to form in his carefully constructed plan. It started with the little things: the way Haley would leave a cup of coffee on his desk in the morning, even though he never asked for it. The way she would quietly tidy up the living room after he left it in disarray, never complaining or making a fuss. The way she would sit by the window in the evenings, lost in thought, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the city lights. There was a quiet strength to her, a resilience that Logan hadn't expected, and it unsettled him. One evening, Logan came home late from work to find Haley in the kitchen. She was standing at the counter, her sleeves rolled up, carefully chopping vegetables. The smell of something warm and comforting filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile atmosphere of the penthouse. "You're cooking?" Logan asked, his voice laced with surprise. Haley glanced up at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I figured we both have to eat," she said simply, "and I didn't think you'd want takeout again." Logan hesitated, then stepped closer. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Haley replied, her tone light. "But I wanted to." For a moment, Logan didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to this, someone doing something for him without expecting anything in return. It was unsettling. And yet, as he sat down at the table and tasted the meal Haley had prepared, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: warmth. Over the next few weeks, moments like these became more frequent. Haley, despite her initial discomfort, began to settle into her new role as Logan's wife. She wasn't trying to win him over or change him, she was simply being herself. And that, more than anything, was what began to chip away at Logan's defenses. But with that closeness came guilt. Logan found himself watching Haley when she wasn't looking, studying the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she read a book, or the way her laughter lit up the room when she spoke to her father on the phone. She was nothing like Robert Brooks. She was kind, selfless, and genuine in a way that Logan hadn't expected. And that realization made his plan feel wrong. One night, as they sat together in the living room, Haley turned to Logan with a hesitant smile. "Thank you," she said softly. Logan frowned. "For what?" "For helping my dad," Haley said. "I know this marriage isn't conventional, but you've done more for him than I could ever repay. It means a lot to me." Logan's chest tightened at her words. He wanted to tell her the truth, that his help wasn't out of kindness, but part of a calculated plan to destroy her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he nodded, his jaw clenched, as he fought the growing sense of shame that gnawed at him. As Haley turned back to her book, Logan stared at her, his mind racing. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to hate her, to see her as nothing more than a pawn in his game. But now, as he sat there in the quiet of the penthouse, he couldn't deny the truth. He was starting to care for her. And that terrified him. Haley had always been a curious person. It wasn't in her nature to pry, but living with Logan, this enigmatic, distant man, left her with more questions than answers. He was kind in small, fleeting ways, but there was always something guarded about him, as if he were holding back a part of himself. She told herself it wasn't her place to dig deeper. After all, their marriage wasn't built on love or trust. It was an arrangement, nothing more. But one evening, while Logan was out at a late meeting, Haley stumbled upon something she wasn't meant to see. She had been looking for a pen in his office, a simple enough task. The room was immaculate, every surface polished, every item in its place. But as she opened one of the drawers in his desk, her hand brushed against a folder. It was thick, its edges worn, as if it had been handled many times. Something about it caught her attention, and before she could stop herself, she pulled it out. Her heart sank as she flipped through the pages. Inside were documents, emails, and handwritten notes, all detailing Logan's plan to ruin her. There were records of her father's financial troubles, medical reports, and even a timeline of events leading up to their marriage. Every detail of her life had been meticulously documented, analyzed, and used against her. And at the center of it all was Logan's cold, calculated goal: revenge. Haley's hands trembled as she read the words on the page. Her mind raced, piecing together the truth. This wasn't a marriage, it was a trap. Logan hadn't married her out of kindness or necessity. He had married her to destroy her, to punish her for sins she hadn't even committed. Tears blurred her vision as she slammed the folder shut and shoved it back into the drawer. Her chest felt tight, her breaths shallow. She had trusted him, even if only a little. She had let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something real between them. But now, all of that was shattered. When Logan returned home later that night, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Haley was sitting on the edge of the couch, her face pale, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She didn't look up when he entered the room. Haley, he said cautiously, setting his briefcase down. Is everything okay? She finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes hit him like a punch to the gut. How long were you going to keep lying to me? She asked, her voice trembling. Logan froze. What are you talking about? Haley stood, her movements sharp and unsteady. Don't play dumb, Logan. I found the folder. I know everything. For a moment, Logan couldn't speak. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, and he didn't know how to stop it. Haley, I can explain. Explain? She interrupted, her voice rising. Explain what? That you married me just to get back at my father? That you've been using me this entire time? What could you possibly say to make this okay? Logan took a step toward her, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said quietly. I didn't expect— You didn't expect what? Haley snapped. That I'd find out? That I'd figure out you've been lying to me since the day we met? Logan's jaw tightened, his guilt and frustration warring within him. I didn't expect to care about you, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Haley's breath caught, but she quickly shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You don't get to say that, she said, her voice breaking. You don't get to pretend this is anything other than what it is. You used me, Logan. You used me, and I'll never forgive you for that. Before Logan could respond, Haley turned and walked out of the room. The sound of the bedroom door slamming echoed through the penthouse, leaving Logan standing alone in the silence. For the first time in years, Logan felt truly powerless. He had spent so long chasing revenge, so long convincing himself that it would bring him peace. But now, as he stood there with Haley's words ringing in his ears, he realized the truth. He had destroyed the one thing that could have saved him. The penthouse felt emptier than ever. Haley had locked herself in the guest bedroom, refusing to speak to Logan. Days passed in silence, each one heavier than the last. Logan tried to approach her, to explain, but every time he knocked on the door, her response was the same. Leave me alone. For the first time in his life, Logan St. James didn't know what to do. He had built his entire existence on control, on strategy, on always being one step ahead. But now, standing on the edge of losing Haley, he realized he had no plan for this. No strategy could undo the damage he had caused. Haley, meanwhile, was a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, they all swirled inside her, leaving her exhausted and broken. She couldn't look at Logan without seeing the lies, the manipulation, the cold calculation that had brought her into his life. And yet, there was a part of her, a small, fragile part that couldn't ignore the moments when he had been kind, when he had shown glimpses of something real. But how could she trust any of it now? One evening, as Haley sat by the window in the guest room staring out at the city lights, there was a soft knock on the door. She didn't respond, expecting Logan to leave as he always did. But this time, he didn't. Ellie, Logan's voice came through the door, low and hesitant. I know you don't want to see me, and I don't blame you, but I need you to know, I'm sorry. Haley's chest tightened, but she stayed silent. I never meant for it to go this far, Logan continued. When I started this, I was angry. I wanted revenge. I thought it would make me feel better, that it would fix everything. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Haley closed her eyes, her hands gripping the edge of the windowsill. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Logan said, his voice breaking slightly. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way, everything changed. You changed me, and I don't want to lose you. The sincerity in his voice caught Haley off guard. She wanted to believe him, but the pain of his betrayal was still too fresh. She stayed where she was, her heart warring with her mind. When Logan finally walked away, Haley felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Was it regret, or was it the faintest flicker of hope? The next morning, Haley woke to find the penthouse eerily quiet. Logan was gone. On the kitchen counter there was a note in his neat handwriting. "I'll give you space, but I'll always be here if you need me." For the next few weeks, Logan kept his distance. He moved into a hotel, leaving Haley alone in the penthouse. But even from afar, he found ways to show her he cared. He arranged for her father to receive the best medical care, ensuring that every bill was paid without question. He sent groceries to the penthouse, always including her favorites, and when Haley's car broke down one morning, she found a new one waiting in the garage, the keys left on the counter with no note, no explanation. At first, Haley was angry. She didn't want his help, didn't want to feel indebted to him. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to see the truth in his actions. Logan wasn't trying to control her anymore. He wasn't trying to manipulate her. He was simply The turning point came one rainy afternoon. Haley was visiting her father at the hospital when she overheard two nurses talking in hushed tones. "Did you hear about the man who paid for Mr. Brooks's surgery?" one of them said. "Apparently he's been covering all the costs anonymously. Must be someone who really cares about him." Haley's heart sank. She knew exactly who it was. That evening, as she sat alone in the penthouse, she found herself thinking about Logan. About the man who had hurt her, yes, but also about the man who had stayed by her side when she needed him most. The man who, despite everything, had shown her a kind of love she hadn't expected. When Logan returned to the penthouse later that night, he was surprised to find Haley waiting for him in the living room. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Hi," she said softly. Logan froze, unsure of what to say. "Hi," he replied cautiously. Haley took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "Not yet. But I can see that you're trying, and I think that means something." Logan's chest tightened, a flicker of hope sparking in his heart. "I'll keep trying," he said quietly, "for as long as it takes." Haley nodded, her expression softening. Okay. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start, and for the first time in a long time, Logan felt like there was a chance, however small, that he could make things right. The days that followed were tentative, like walking on thin ice. Haley and Logan began to coexist again, but the air between them was fragile, filled with unspoken words and lingering doubts. Logan didn't push her, he gave her space, letting her set the pace. For the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to control the outcome, he was simply waiting. Haley, meanwhile, found herself watching Logan in a new light. He was different now, quieter, softer. The sharp edges of his personality seemed to have dulled, replaced by a man who was trying, in his own imperfect way, to make amends. But the scars of his betrayal still lingered, and Haley wasn't sure if she could ever fully trust him again. The final test came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Haley received a call from the hospital. Her father's condition had taken a turn for the worse, and the doctors weren't sure if he would make it through the night. Panic gripped her as she rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to do, who to turn to. And then, without thinking, she called Logan. He arrived within minutes, his face pale with concern. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with worry. Haley's voice broke as she explained the situation. "They don't think he's going to make it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do." Logan didn't hesitate. He took her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "I'm here. Whatever you need, I'm here." For the next several hours, Logan stayed by Haley's side. He spoke to the doctors, made arrangements for additional specialists, and ensured that Haley had everything she needed. He didn't leave her for a moment, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. When the worst of the crisis had passed and her father stabilized, Haley finally allowed herself to breathe. She sat in the hospital waiting room, exhausted but relieved, as Logan handed her a cup of coffee. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from crying. Logan sat down beside her, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to thank me," he said. I wanted to be here for you." Haley looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she saw the man he was trying to become. The man who had put aside his pride, his anger, and his need for control to be there for her when she needed him most. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. A few weeks later, Haley stood in the kitchen, watching as Logan carefully set the table for dinner. It was a simple meal, nothing like the extravagant dinners he used to arrange, but it felt more meaningful than anything she had experienced before. There was no pretense, no manipulation, just two people trying to rebuild something fragile and new. As they sat down to eat, Logan cleared his throat, his expression serious. "Haley," he began, "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies, for the pain I caused you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm not the same man I was when this started. You've changed me, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust." Haley's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope. She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I don't know if I'll ever forget what happened," she said honestly, "but I can see that you're trying, and I think I'm ready to try too." Logan's breath caught, his grip on her hand tightening. "You mean that?" Haley nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "I do." The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild, and a past to reconcile. But for the first time, Logan and Haley were facing the future together, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two people willing to fight for something real. As they sat together in the quiet of the penthouse, the city lights twinkling outside the window, Haley leaned her head on Logan's shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. Logan wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to protect the woman he had once sought to destroy, because now, she wasn't just part of his plan, she was his everything. Thank you so much for watching this story on Emma's Stories. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt and inspiring tales. Your support means the world to us. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one.